Let me first of all introduce the restoration of the monumental Skylight of Palau, Montaner, and then I will talk about the facade. It is in the corner between Mallorca and Llúria streets. It's one of the few villas in the Eixample district of Barcelona. That's where Ildefons Cerdà did the extension. Beyond the walls in the 19th century, this was the extension area of the city, and it was a very prestigious district. The construction of the Montaner Palace was done between 1889 and 93. It had several owners, and once the Civil War was over, the building became a single building owned by the Spanish heritage. It is currently the headquarters of the central government offices. It is a listed government, and it's a jewel of modernist architecture from the late 19th century. It is one of the early works by Lluís, Domènech, and Montaner. It's an eclectical piece of art. It was heavily dominated by the taste of the owner who made the commission, Montaner's uncle, and it was first built by Domènech Estapà. It contains many of the features of Domènech and Montaner's architecture. Domènech Estapà, the first architect, filled the building with, made the structure, but then Domènech and Montaner added all the symbols and the naturalistic and the fantasy elements with a great compositive freedom. The central skylight and the facades of this palace are a great example of this multidisciplinary work that brought, where Domènech and Montaner led not only the construction work, but also the applied arts, and we see the mosaics, the paintings, the stained glass, and everything that he worked with, where he worked with his usual collaborators to restore the skylight and the facade. We tried to preserve the architectural and artistic values, and especially we tried to preserve the stability of the structures and the materials in order to guarantee the safety of the elements and of the people, to avoid elements falling off either inside the building or out in the street. And we also intended to preserve the elements for present and future generations in the best possible condition. First of all, let's talk about the main hall. It is covered by a stained glass skylight. It's too height. Antoni Rigau, the glassmaker, who's is the author of the Palau de la Música big skylight, and also of the Casa Lleó Morera skylights, as well as the Reus Navàs house. This skylight, according to Núria Gil, historian, one of the best examples to study the glass work at the time. It helps us understand the different stages that the stained glass and leaded glass went through in modernist times. Even if the Palau skylight are not part of modernism at that time, they already contain all the elements of modernism. For instance, the mosaic glass, which was later adopted in modernist architecture. This skylight is a barrel vault, 6 meters wide, and with great colors. It remembers a sort of a flower garden with passiflora and so on, with plant motifs. There are 4 sections divided into 5 sections, and it has this leaded glass. It has an iron framework that brings together 5 sections. It filters the lights through the artistic and naturalistic motifs that are represented here. After that, there is a protection in steel and glass as a protection layer. And there are also some PVC skirts that minimize the entrance of water and dirt to protect the original glass. And here we can also see how the stained glass window is supported to the glass roof, to the glass panels. Let's talk now about the problems that the skylight presented. The damage and the aggressions were visible, and they were identified in different elements and constructive materials that make up this monumental skylight. These are a result of lack of conservation and maintenance, as well as the passing of time, the damage of rainfall, and high temperatures that it is subject to, both inside and outside. It creates a sort of a greenhouse effect because there's hardly any ventilation either inside or outside. And, well, the protection layer, the protection roof is inefficient. It was only built to protect the stained glass from external impacts without taking into account the importance of temperature variations throughout the year. The night lights, which were overlapping there, eliminated the previous ventilation that existed in that roofing because of the extrados, and therefore the intrados increased temperature, and the glass was subject to a higher temperature than expected. So the negative and degradation effect on the constructive materials of this skylight were increased. Let me tell you about the general problems that we see in the intrados. For instance, we saw a disassembly of certain parts and pieces of the stained glass from the lead cords. That meant that they could fall, and some glass pieces could fall on the hull. The conservation state of this skylight it was essential. Some parts of the glass were broken because of the situation of the skylight, which makes it difficult to clean up and to maintain. And if we look at the extrados in the outside, we saw a number of pathologies. High temperature, for instance, in the space between the extrados and the glass protection cover. Dirt, accumulation of additional material on the glass, for instance, sand, water stains, leaves, things which could be actually seen from the inside. Therefore, the whole drawing was completely blurred. Sometimes the fact that, the glass, which is rigid, was disadjusted from the lead, which is more flexible. Some fractured pieces and large amounts of lead that was coming off or peeling off after a restoration from 1980. The original binding material had already affected some of the parts of the skylight. The intervention already included a number of interventions aimed at neutralizing the causes of the pathologies we mentioned. We wanted to eliminate their consequences on the different constructive materials of the skylight, but we also wanted to do a repair of the different materials, all the materials that make up the skylight, while preserving the function of the building, which is used for admin purposes and also for protocol events. We had to act making daily activities compatible with the interventions. It was quite complex, actually, to combine both things. That's why we defined a set of interventions with segregation of the working space and the circulation spaces. We had weekly schedules to adapt to the schedules of activities in the building, so it was quite complex. Then, the nature of the building, the facilities, MEPs, structural criteria, constructive criteria and materials led us to find a wide range of constructive and technical solutions which would be compatible with the architectural nature and the unique values of this building. and of the skylight, of course. We also wanted to act in a harmonious way, harmonious with the original materials and construction structures, while preserving the environmental and artistic values of this project. And at the same time, we also wanted to have some economic criteria to facilitate maintenance in as much as possible, and at the same time to find solutions which required a low economic cost, with the aim of guaranteeing the authenticity, the security, safety, protection of elements and persons. We had a multidisciplinary teams with specialists in mobile scaffolds, iron and glass structures, and so on. The work lasted for 6 months. Once we had limited each intervention section, we protected all the different elements and materials of the different sections to avoid materials coming off and falling into the hole. We also installed a scaffold, which was a sort of a movable bridge to work in the restoration work. The outer pitched roof as a protection for the skylight was covered with fabric to avoid it warming up excessively. We also had to dismantle the skylight once we had vacuum cleaned all the skylights, and we had we disassembled the frameworks, the frames, and we removed them. And in a specific area of the palace, we removed the glass from its frame so that we could then wrap them up and send them to be restored by specialists. And at the same time, we installed polycarbonate pieces that replaced the original skylight while it was being restored. At the time of extraction, we realized that all the stained glass was placed in an inverse system. We didn't find any documents, and we decided to preserve the same maneuver, the same position, to avoid the drawing orientation. The protection roof, this pitched roof, was restored while the stained glass was being restored in the workshop. And we also changed the fluorescent lights, which were totally obsolete, and we placed proper lights. And the extrados of the skylight was replaced by this metal grid that had permanent ventilation. The steel structure was restored, was treated with anti-rust treatment, and it became the support of this new anti-reflective glass, which was protected from solar radiation thanks to the placement of some fabric attached to the structure with some tensors. Once this was restored, then the glass was reinstalled or reinstated in the frames, and then we were able to replace the skylight once it was fully cleaned and restored. We also cleaned up the rainwater collection system to protect the skylight, for instance, and we also placed an anti-bird net to avoid birds going into the area. We also installed new low-consumption cold LED lights with warm light to lit the skylight in an indirect way. Regarding the restoration of the stained glass, they were scientifically restored in the workshop. And we had two different procedures in sections 1 and 2 in north and south areas, which are the ones that have more flowers. For sections 3 and 4, in the southern area, which were more degraded, all the LED sections had to be replaced. We also replaced all the fractures, and we But first of all, we had to eliminate all of the lead elements. We had to take pictures of each one of the sections to replace the lead lines. We also generated maps for each sections, each panel. We cleaned them from the inside and from the outside, and we documented the specific features of each panel to have a full documentation. We also repaired whatever fractures we found, if possible, by extracting the stained glass. We then applied new lead in the areas where it was needed by using lead that was similar to the original one. However, where the lead was fractured, we simply welded it with 50% tin. And finally, we did the painting application in cold. On the reverse sides where painting was originally applied, especially for those parts that were extremely degraded. And we finally added the tinned copper ribbons, and to see the differences between between the new and the old areas, we marked them with the year of the intervention, 2015. And to combat the high temperatures of the skylight, we used specific glass that reduces heating, and we also promoted north-south cross ventilation of the skylight. I think we have had a problem with the synchronicity of the image. But in any case, if I have more time, let me talk about the facade. To try and make a proper interpretation of the Palau Montaner facade, we need to bear in mind how it was built, in which stages. Domènech and Montaner finished the work of this palace by completing the top floor and adapting to the existing volumes. Domènech and Montaner simply added ornamental elements to the cubic pre-existing structure. The facade expressed the different floors in a very clear way, and there was a hierarchy of openings and so on. 4 horizontal layers for each story, and a very powerful eave in the facade. The main facade faces the northeast. Here we see 4 windows in the ground floor and in the first floor. The vertical makeup of these windows are for bedrooms and from the library. In the top, in the noble floor, we see the differences between the decorated classical windows that have this laced stone and the 3 central windows which open up to a huge hall with a balcony with laced stone motifs, with plants motifs. The 2 lower floors also use stucco, creating a sort of a skirting board, a baseboard. The openings are grouped up as vertical windows. They are centered according to the axis, and they are reinforced with more luxurious decorations in the top floor. Here we see that some of the windows were crowned with floral, stone-laced plant motifs, and in the top part of the central body we see more complex Germanic style coats of arms and a symbol of glory presiding over the building. We also see this phoenix bird in rampant position, which expresses the rebirth of the country. In the lateral facade, northwest facade actually, offers faces the Llúria Street. Here is where the bow window was located. In the ground floor, we see a sort of a bow window with a wooden and glass structure. And on the top, we see the preeminence of ceramics. The facades of Montaner Palace include ceramics in the top frieze. Here we see some allegories to the printing press by using this shiny ceramics, this sort of ceramics which is typical from Valencia. Here we see pre-Raphaelite figures, the printing art, and here we see an explanation of how the printing press evolved from its invention. So the top frieze is presided over by a big eave with ceramics. This wide eave, which protrudes from the facade, includes monumental coffered elements. And we also see the fish scales in red ceramics, glazed ceramics. Domènech Montaner also designed the garage gates, creating these triangular elements crowned by plant and floral motifs. The reason for the pathologies of the constructive and the different materials which were restored had to do with lack of maintenance and preservation, rainwater, and, the action of man and the elements. And they were especially visible in the elements that were outdoors. For instance, at the top, in the finial of the bow window and in some parts of the roofing, we could see plenty of pathologies that were related to humidity, moisture, and lack of waterproofing. For stone elements, we realized that there were micro fissures, micro cracks that had to do with the expansion of clay contained in the stone, which is porous and it absorbs water. In some cases, there was a biofilm as well because of water retention, and some elements were coming out. We also saw that the eave had some water infiltrations, some cracks and fissures, the existence of dirt. Overall, ceramic surfaces were also dirty, and there were bumps and bubbles, and some of the glazing was lost. There were loss of color and loss of the joining. We also saw some of the cladding of the facade coming off, in some cases because some non-breathable painting had been used here. We also saw dirt in the windows. And regarding ironwork, we realized some elements were deformed, some of them were rusty. The interface between stone and ironwork was also rusty. Some of the decorative elements had also been lost, and so on and so forth. We decided to neutralize, first of all, the reasons that led to some of the pathologies and to alleviate their impact on the structure and the materials of the facade, as well as to consolidate and restore the materials of all elements and materials, especially taking into account the use of the building. Restoration was done while the building was being used, and we tried to combine the usual functioning of the building and the restoration work. We did the same as for the Skylight. Structural, constructive elements, environmental criteria, economic criteria were used along the same lines as for the Skylight. We also had experts in material restoration, and the intervention lasted for 8 months. We will see some images of the different processes and the reparation and restoration of different decorative, ornamental, and architectural elements of the facade. For instance, this is Vilaseca or Montjuic stone. First, we cleaned it by sandblasting it with aluminium particles. We eliminated microorganic elements, and finally, we repaired the volumes with added materials. And we also did a little bit of painting to give it the original shine. Regarding the walls, the facing, we also sandblasted with aluminium particles, and we used different tools and techniques to clean up the previous restorations and repaired. We also reinstated the volumes. We added some chromatic homogenization. We also added some lime grouch, for instance, and we added anti-graffiti elements in the main facade. Regarding the finials of the building, we also cleaned up the facings of those walls. We eliminated some of the elements until we came to the stable building, and we applied a lime grouch as a basis for the painting coat that was chosen. In the ceramic areas, we repaired, we did some mechanical cleanup. We also did some chemical cleansing with neutral soap and so on. We also sandblasted the structures, and we used epoxy resins, half-density epoxy resin with mortar, and we finally did the rejoining or the joining. We joined the tiles and we added the missing volumes. And finally, we did the pictorial refurbishment following historical documents. Regarding the eave, we did chemical cleansing with the removing of paint without altering the wood. And finally, we opened the woodwork on the different Venetian windows and so on. We complemented the missing materials or the degraded materials. We also added some inserts of wood or some specialized materials. And we also repaired the mechanical parts, and we varnished the surface overall. We also added water-based chemical varnishes inside and outside, and an antifungal in the eaves intrados. We also used a breathable paint that gave a homogeneous tone to the paintings. We also used a filler in some of the areas where it was needed. We repaired the windows. We copied all the LED ribbons, and we repaired this window glass panes as we had done for the Skylight. Regarding the bow window eave, first of all, we added some waterproofing. We cleansed the non-original water collection pipe. We homogenized different surfaces. We homogenized the slopes. We gave polyurethane primers, as well as breathable copper sheets to make that eave more breathable. Regarding the structure, we decided to place wooden supports on the copper sheets all the way to the water collection pipe. We also added a structural mesh. Let me move on now to the ironwork and the outer fence. First of all, we worked on the areas that were affected by rust. We worked on the decorative materials. We replaced lost materials, and we also added an inhibitor, primer, and some water protection. For the lost elements and for the degraded elements, we created molds and casts based on the existing ones. Some of the iron, we had first of all to paint, to etch the painting before repairing it. And regarding the capitals of some of the pedestals and columns, we also worked on stabilizing the elements. And let me just show some comparison between the before and after the restoration. Thank you very much.